Welcome to another episode of Angels, Positivity, and Love. Incredible guests the world over with amazing backgrounds, incredible insights for us. They're here to share what they've either experienced or learned. Oftentimes, they're on a path of being a healer, healing, or just giving service to others. We've had psychologists, doctors, one White House physician to the U.S. president on, a retired Rear Admiral U.S. Navy, the youngest Delta Force operator ever admitted to that organization, studied naturopathy on the side. An Australian actor. If you watch Amazon Prime these days at all, or Tubi, you'll see it on Sea Patrol. We had Captain Mike Flynn on. If you go see Elvis Down Under, the musical, you'll see him on stage. He's absolutely wonderful, gave a great interview. One quick housekeeping note, we have 300 episodes plus booked into basically the last month, December of 2025. We have 210 of those shows already taped and should have another 70 done by the end of 2024. I just want to thank everybody. We've had over 500,000 visitors, super shy folks. Put more comments in, and an emoji counts as a comment. Hit that like button. It's the only way we're going to get a little more audience traction. Although we do have one guest with 1 million plus on their guest list who's going to be pretty aggressive in about a month or so. So we're looking forward to that. I want to thank Dr. FRED Luskin for coming on the show. He's coming to us from California, amazing background, whether we're talking mindfulness, meditation, forgiveness would be the key code word here. He's got a couple books out. He's been doing this an awfully long time. His audience runs the gamut from the general population worldwide to executives, doctors, psychologists, and many other specialty areas. He's both a researcher, psychologist, and again, I'm going to just say a reminder or a bit of inspiration for us all to let go a little more of what you think you know, to go with the flow, and allow more and love more, I think is how I'd like to sum up his intro. Fred, we were chatting before the show. You are super cool about this. You've been doing it a long time. Can you describe how you got into this groove?
Forgiveness. Well, I mean, it really goes back to having a girlfriend in high school. No, I mean that back in the 70s, who was into meditation before I even knew what it was. So, and she was odd and very unusual at that time. And I remember she tried to teach me a little bit of yoga, and I mean, I didn't know from anything about that. And then one time we were together and she got sick for about 2 weeks. She had a bad flu. And during those 2 weeks, I took one of the books that she had given me and started doing yoga. And it altered something in me. Like from the beginning of doing hatha yoga practice, something shifted in me and I was, 10 degrees different than I was before then. So it got me interested in spirituality. It got me more than interested, internal practice. It 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 showed me that something in my life was going to be practiced like that. I didn't know what the hell it meant. I barely knew what it was. When we went to college, she and I went together. I took yoga classes because they offered them through the gym, through the PE department. I was terrible at it. I mean, I had been an athlete. I could barely bend over. But I persevered. I mean, I could barely bend over when I started, and I just kept at it. And yoga led me to ideas about meditation. As a senior in college, I took a class from a professor visiting from India, and this is 1972. So this is incredibly rare. And he talked about the legitimate saints from India because he had met some of them and he was trying to translate yoga and Western psychology. And we started meditating in his class and I've never stopped. So that class triggered me a lifetime meditation practice. So those two things were probably the strongest instigators of what led me, I don't know, 20 years later, when I was at Stanford, looking for a dissertation topic. I wanted to do research on some spiritual quality and show that it had definite, provable, real world advantages.
When you were doing the meditation, either in that class with the Indian professor or elsewhere, do you have a couple moments or a moment you could share that was profound or different, or you were definitely left wondering what the heck just happened?
I don't think that's what I was looking for. Um, if I can be honest with what I was looking for, there was some degree of certainly peace. Like I knew that I wanted to be at peace. But I also when I look back or think about it, I wanted to grow. I wanted to become my better self. That was more pulling to me than anything else. I didn't look very much for phenomena or experiences. I knew or I assumed or believed that yoga, meditation, prayer, mantra, visualization, that they were optimally designed for me to become let's just say, the citizen that I was meant to become. So that was more my pull.
And I love how you say pull. We just had a guest say the same thing about pushing and pulling in life. And when you find your groove, you're getting pulled in a beautiful direction.
No question.
Ah,
But at some level, I intuit a universe that is pulling all of us. And I'm just aware of the tiny, tiny stream that touches me, but it's pulling all of us to our better selves.
when did forgiveness become a key word for you?
Well, it became a clear word for me when I couldn't do it. So my biggest forgiveness experience was recognizing how awful I was at it. And a very close friend, a long time ago, um, abandoned me. Maybe not abandoned is the right word, but just disrespected. Really, what I was treated badly, and I reacted so poorly and developed a grudge against them, complained about them, became bitter, less trustful. Um, really, I I destabilized. I no longer had a sense of safety in the world because if this individual was not trustworthy, then nothing is trustworthy. And I fell into just a scared space. That scared space allowed me to empathize with so many people who had been hurt in so many ways because they were struggling with that same unsafe space, and they used bitterness and disappointment as a covering to that space. After a couple of years of being lost in that space, my wife went to me one day and said, "Fred, you can do better than this." She did. She looked at me and said, "When you and I connected, I never expected you to be so bad at life. Like, I love you. I don't like you as much, but I still love you. You can do better." Well, that was the kick in the ass that I needed. And I started like trying, well, what does that mean to do better? And I mean, I was righteous in my self-pity. I was, in love with my victimhood. But it wasn't working. I mean, I was not a pleasant human being. It was that moment or somewhere around that moment where forgiveness popped into my head. It was like, well, idiot, you're going to have to do something. It's called forgiveness and like take the program. But I didn't even know what the program was. Um, but something opened because I didn't want to hurt my wife. Like it touched something in me that said, Fred, your bad behavior has consequences. So I had an epiphany experience in a Safeway. I did. I was at a job I didn't like, and that was deepening this self-pity that surrounded me. And I had a job I didn't like, and I came home from that job I didn't like. My wife and my infant daughter were there. And my wife meets me at the door and says, you need to go shopping. I mean, not harsh like that, but we're out of some things, go get them. So I said to her, okay, I'll go to Albertsons, which was close by. She said, no, you have to go to Safeway. In my self-pity nonsense mind, I got frustrated with her. Well, you're always asking me to do too much. I mean, Safeway was 1 mile further away than Albertson, but I was in a real like negative space. She said, well, I want something that's only at Safeway. So I trundled off to Safeway, feeling frustrated and not seen and taken for granted, the whole 9 yards. I walk into Safeway, go directly to the place where this item's going to be, and it's not there. So now I'm angry, justified. My wife doesn't love me, all this nonsense. I stop in the middle of Safeway because I mean my self-pity like blew a gasket. And I stop for a moment and recognize for just a nanosecond the abundance of Safeway. Like I'm just sitting there and I think, wow, they have everything. And I'm still like sarcastic, except the thing my wife wants, like I don't stop being me. But I had a reverential understanding of my own abundance. Wow, I can buy anything. All I have to do is hand them some green stuff. And I walked out of that Safeway changed. I saw my life clearly for the first time in a number of years. I turned that epiphany into a cornerstone of the Stanford Forgiveness Project. That we are all lying to ourselves about what we don't have and putting blinders on to what we do have. And that and one or two other experiences extracted me from my unforgiveness, turned it around completely, and allowed me to create an intervention that I was able to demonstrate through my dissertation was helpful to people who couldn't forgive.
And did your friend ever end up knowing that you did all this forgiveness work, the program, your work with Stanford? Is that someone who's still around or became aware of this?
It stopped mattering anything about him because I was free. And we connected again, I don't know, not that long after. I didn't even need to talk to him about it because I was free. And we're now again the best of friends. In fact, I just saw him 3 or 4 days ago, and
Awesome.
it's a complete non-issue. It doesn't even exist anymore, except in my story.
Before we get on to some of your work, either worldwide, Stanford, again, you've got quite the track record. Could you take a moment just to talk to us about the difference between here and here? There's a lot of cultures, organizations, self-help, and other that describe all this. And I'll try to put a few words out there: thinking, stress, fear, worry, judging, knowing to the preclusion of possibility. And then down here, no limits, timelessness, love, consciousness, or awareness. How do you describe the flows like thinking, openness, heart? How do you describe all that? And what's your advice for people daily? Is it just do a little less thinking, pay attention more?
We all have a felt sense of whether life is safe and we belong. Many people have had experiences that have them feel very unsafe. I have found that there are ways to help people in the moment feel okay, safe, welcome inside themselves. And when they can touch that felt sense, they can release enough, or they do release enough to let out a breath. And then the world finally opens again for to have some freedom or choice. If they don't cultivate that touch somewhere in them, that they're loved, welcome, safe, good, even for a moment, they're going to put on unforgiveness to find a reason outside of themselves that life is not good. Life is very threatening to everything alive, and it's also incredibly beautiful. And we all have different touches of both of those, the threat and the goodness. It's a mind-body thing. Some people get there through thinking, some people get there through love, some people get there through religion, some there get there just through hope. I don't think there's one portal.
I love it. And let's go to a big picture question, eternal, not to foist it on you, but is love the fabric of the universe?
I have no idea. That let me put it this way. I think that's probably true, but because of our consciousness limitations, we can't touch that. The more we can access love, the more that appears true, and the more the experience of love reminds us that it is true whenever we experience it. Like there's a truthfulness to love. It's just an is. And whenever one experiences that loving is, they release whatever stuff they've carried to defend why they don't have the touch of something that they want. Even if you had the worst childhood, which many people have, at the age of 45, the world is still there in all its beauty and all its goodness. It's still right there. It never goes anywhere. And so there's something inside that's being obscured.
And before the show, we were talking about like Thich Nhat Hanh, although you had a better way to say his name, Yogananda and some other figures, Ram Dass maybe. Can you talk to us along those lines of influential moments where you had a chance to either listen to, be around, feel the presence of some of these figures, and how that shaped your own journey?
I mean, I told you the story that I had with Thich Nhat Hanh. For me, that was quite remarkable. I have met like important folks in this world from the work I've done. I never met Thich Nhat Hanh. I went to a half an hour of a talk he gave in one of the auditoriums at Stanford. And I didn't even pay that much attention because I was in a hurry. Like I had to go teach a class, and I got a Jamba Juice in the Union because I knew I wasn't going to have time to eat. I walked across the hall, to the music center at Stanford. I walked into the big auditorium, and he's in the front of the room. He's speaking probably Vietnamese. It's being translated into something I can barely understand what he's saying. I'm sitting in the back of the room. I'm there for maybe 20, 25 minutes. I walk out of that auditorium, and every single person I pass, I feel a tremendous affection for, and they all look like friends. From sitting, listening to Thich Nhat Hanh for 20 minutes, he transformed my consciousness or his energy. So when I think of someone like Thich Nhat Hanh or Yogananda, they live in that consciousness all the time. I can visit it for moments, and if we're receptive, they give us access to that kind of loving awareness.
That was a beautiful one. Do you have another story like that that you can share? And I need to mention psychological safety is one of the areas besides like mindfulness, meditation, forgiveness that you teach, plus something you just said about 5 seconds ago.
Yes, one other came to my mind. The woman who replaced Yogananda as the head of his organization, Self-Realization Fellowship. I was walking in the back of, well, that's Thich Nhat Hanh, yeah. I was walking in the back of their headquarters with my daughter, and she came out the other door, and my daughter, exactly, that's Yogananda. And my daughter was there, and this woman came up to my daughter and just pranamed like this, and said hello. And so then she said hello to me. And when I was in her presence, I had this sense that there was no one home but energy. Like there was no personality or ego. There was nothing to butt up against. There was just energy. And it was a very distinctive experience that it was, you can feel in each of us how most of us have a personality that we hand to the world. Here I am, I'm Fred, and Fred needs to be defended. This woman was just energy, and maybe it was love, that I don't know, but it was just swirling energy with no identification point. And that was an absolute remarkable experience.
And that leads us into another question for you, which you touched upon before the show. Is there a way you could describe how you've learned to roll with what you've got sensory wise? It doesn't mean you're doing spiritual woo 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 work or anything like that. It just means you do have a very subtle way of operating and feeling things out, whether it's people sitting before you seeking help as a psychologist and others, business settings, executives. You've got different types of executives. You've learned how to kind of penetrate their radar screen to help them relax into their heart more. So they'll take the message of forgiveness or just openness or opening openness and allowing more in life and having a little more fun or breathing. Can you share with us how you describe your own expansion on that front and what you do or how you roll?
It starts with an intention. I've had to ask myself over the years why I'm here. And I believe that's where most of this starts. Like we connect with who we are, what we want to contribute to this world, and how we might know if we're successful contributing to the world. So I recognize that I don't have a huge number of skills, but I can talk to people, I can talk with people, and I have a way of quieting down my own self to be available to them. Like when I talk in front of a group, like I'm trivial. You know, it's just this is my job. This is what I'm supposed to do. But that intention is you're here to be of help to them. And the way you can be of help to them is you're quieting down whatever fredness there is so that you can then be used by whatever energy sources are lurking everywhere to be of some use to them. Use your skill at speaking, your understanding of forgiveness to help this audience open to the part of themselves that forgiveness makes sense to. So I do that with a sense of this is not about me at all. I mean, it's just, I mean, I'm standing here, I'm talking, but you know, that in and of itself is trivial. So there's an openness and then a desire for in whatever subtle way I can I use these skills to help you quiet down so that you can hear whatever that universal truth is about being mindful, about being forgiving, about maybe being a little kinder, because that's what the big energy wants. And in my tiny way, I can be a conduit for that energy. That's about the best description I can give you.
And this next question is going to be a little muddled. It's triangulating in on something that you're hopefully going to take that football and run with it. Here's the 3 data points. In 13 years, I've definitely learned a couple things. Where you put your focus is where you put your focus. Oh, and how you spend your energy is how you spend your energy. But I want to read a quote from an archangel, but take that with a grain of salt. But I didn't definitely come up with this quote. So if more people would listen, less conflict would arise in any given situation. And now with that, there's something about what's going on. And we talked about it before the show in the big picture for mankind. There's no way you couldn't say mankind hasn't been a little too much thinking. Maybe you could call it negativity, but let's just call it complexity or density is what you mentioned at one point.
It's negativity.
Yeah,
It's not.
but so can you take all of that and just say how it's right in front of us? It's here and now that you could do a little more of this and a little less of this, and it would make all the difference in the world right now.
Well, you know about that we're wired with a negativity bias. I mean, that's something that would not have escaped you doing this work.
Oh, I'm a pinata. I mean, I ask for it. It's like if there's an aluminum metal crush can mechanism somewhere, I'm that aluminum can. But the good news is I spring right back the next day into a full can again. Then I get half crushed every other day. Mankind's pretty
Well, but our biological imperative is to stay alive.
Hmm.
And in order to do that, we are gifted with a nervous system that looks for problems and things that are wrong and alerts us to danger and regurgitates danger and over focuses on danger so that we survive enough to reproduce. So that is a biological inheritance. It's nothing wrong with any human being. Within that, we have choice and untapped parts of our brain that can be trained to not get rid of that biological imperative, but to create alternative skills that can be used. So one of the things that I do in that domain is if I'm teaching a class of people who are unforgiving, right? I will ask them to stop for a moment, take a couple breaths, just stop, take a couple breaths. It's so simple. And then just like, breathe 2, 3, 4 times, quiet down, and then ask yourself, in the last 24 hours, who's been kind to you? Like to look at the last 24 hours, the way you might look for problems, but to really look at the last 24 hours and ask yourself, did anybody say a nice word to me? Did anybody listen to me complain, show me care? Did anyone cook me dinner, do my laundry, help with the kids, help me at work, give me advice? Where was kindness? And I'll do this for 5 minutes. And then people will completely calm down from doing that. So they're now not as much in threat. And then I will remind them that since you don't do that, you are getting such a ridiculous distortion of reality that those sensors in you of negativity are not helping you see the world as it is. And what you need to add dramatically is an appreciation of goodness, of beauty, of kindness. You have to do that. It can't be done for you, but you can transform yourself into somebody who sees those things, hears them, and stores them. And then when you have a little better accuracy about your life, you will naturally become more forgiving.
Is this in either of your books, Forgive for Good or Stress Free for Good? One of them you co-wrote with another fine gentleman.
That practice is not, but I just wrote another book
That's what I was asking.
um,
Yep.
called, it's a book called Forgive for Recovery. We did a workbook on forgiveness for people recovering from addictions. And as that's in that newer book that comes out in March. But I think you get a sense of what I might do. It's very tangible. It's very grounded, but it's reminding people as one of those three data points that where you put your attention is enormous. I add that where your intention
Mm.
determines a lot of where you put your attention. So
That sounds like a fourth book, if you ask me, for the general public and summer, fall of next year. I have a quote from you for you from an angel. It's very generic, very easy, all about kindness, compassion, gentleness. Here it is, and I'd love to get a reaction. Sometimes the person next to you or a stranger just needs validation via love and compassion. A smile changes any moment, so too does laughter or a few kind words. Be compassion to all, do it.
I mean, that's my belief as to what at least some of this universe's energy is shouting at us all the time. Be kind, be kind, be kind. In whatever form, whatever way you can, be kind. And that is to me, if there's a God force, that's what its message is. I'll tell you one other, this just came to my mind because it was so inspiring to me. I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, I sit on a board and we went to a board event where they honor somebody in LA for like being a really good human being. So that year they were honoring Father Boyle, the Los Angeles-based priest who brought the gangs together to dialogue. And I had heard of him and I'd never seen him. But I'm sitting in the audience and the people around me, he didn't speak to as much as what he said spoke to me. He gets up there and he tells his story, which is, I'm a new priest. I'm in South Central Los Angeles where the gangs are fighting. I have this church. Nobody's coming to my church because it's too dangerous. And I'm not doing anybody any good because I'm afraid of the gangs. He said, and I'm so, why did God send me here? Like, if I'm wasting everybody's time. So he thought to himself, well, what's my job? And he said, my job is to like help make wherever God sent me a good place for God on God's earth. And so that caused him to get the guts to go out, try to create a meeting between the Blood and the Crips. He said when he went out there, he put on like 8 clerical collars, wore like 7 crucifixes, was holding, hey, look, I'm a priest, don't shoot. It's like, but he went out and did it because his understanding was as a priest, this is God's earth, not mine. So God put me here in this job. Now show up. But the words that was so inspiring to me were, how do I help on God's earth make it amenable for God to be on God's earth? That would be some defining something of in my little way when I teach or coach forgiveness, trying to do something along those lines.
Two things we haven't officially touched on, but we kind of have: storytelling, which is a big part of your repertoire, and I think we've gotten a taste of it, and then positivity or positive psychology. First, storytelling. Would you have one of those moments where you were the storyteller, you had the audience locked up like a fish, hook, line, and sinker? Do you have one of those moments of memory somewhere, somehow? Could have been executives, it could have been students, graduate students, or abroad. Where were you? What was the storytelling about?
No, but I remember how storytelling became a part of my work. And it was again through seeing my own ugliness. So for a number of years, my wife and I had real struggles with her mother. And her mother had psychological issues at that point, and I handled them terribly. And my wife didn't know what to do between the two extremes. So we would go visit them on the East Coast, and her mom would misbehave, and I'd misbehave, and then my wife and I would fight, and it was just we would visit them for one day and fight for 3. So it was a bad deal all around. One day, I'm up in visiting her parents. We're fighting. I run away. I start realizing some things that, Fred, this is ridiculous. I make a phone call to a friend of mine who knows we're visiting, and I start complaining about my mother-in-law. And the friend does something similar that my wife did. He said, well, of course, you always complain about her when you go there. Well, that hit me. Oh, interesting. Like, well, if I didn't complain so much, would this still be a problem? And the answer was probably not so much, It's like, even if she is difficult, if you limit it to when she was difficult, you might spare yourself and your wife and other people some suffering. So that was the first line. The second line, and this was took some deep thinking because this got turned into a really essential part of the Forgiveness Project, was, Fred, why are you going to visit her mother? You don't like her. And I realized it's because I'm trying to support my wife. And then I realized, well, if you're arguing with her mother all the time, you're not supporting her in the slightest. So I started asking that question. Why are you here? Well, I want to support my wife. I want to help her. I want to introduce my kids to her grandparents. Well, if that's what you want, why are you such an idiot? And I turned that whole drama into something I called positive intention. So, Fred, if you're going to there to help your wife, help her. So if her mother misbehaves, see how she's doing. How you handling your mom, not making things worse. If you want your kids to get to know their grandparents, don't create a fuss every time you're there. So what I did was change my story, which became the forgiveness story, which is, for years I told a story about how awful this person was and poor me. Well, that wasn't the true story. The true story was I went there to try to help, and I failed badly at that. So the story had to change to be, how do I manifest what I actually want? And the whole game changed. Because I could either not go, or if I'm going to go with some integrity, not full of victimhood. And that became a central tenet of the forgiveness work, that positive intention story.
Okay, and thank you for that. That was beautiful. What have you enjoyed most for a speaking engagement abroad or domestically that is a real memory for you? You feel like you did some good, reached a large audience, or just a small audience, but really well. What stands out, if you don't mind sharing one of those moments? You were up on stage or just in front of a small group, seminar, something. Do you have one more of those you could share?
I have two that come to mind. I went to the country of Colombia 5, 6 years ago, I think twice. The first time I went there, forgiveness was still pretty raw after their civil war. I was invited to give a talk to about 400 people in an auditorium, and they all spoke Spanish. I spoke English, and they had somebody in a room doing simultaneous interpretation. So I'm speaking, and I go out in front of the room, and I realize there are a lot of hurt people here. I mean, that Civil War had touched a lot of people. And I realized I don't speak Spanish. I don't even know what they're experiencing. And I felt very vulnerable. Like I'm up in the front of a room, about 400 people. I don't really know what's going on. I can't understand the language. And I felt some sense of threat, like I didn't know how they were going to take what I'm going to say, or whether it would arouse negativity, whatever it was. And I thought about, well, do you want to give this talk? Like it feels dicey. And I got a very clear message that this is the work you chose for this life. Just do your work. And, you made this choice. There's energy behind you. Go do your work. So I went and did my work, and I felt very proud of that. That what I had created and opened to an energy which pushed me in the right direction. The other thing that I have a similar sense of, um, I'm going to say pride, but it is a pride, but it's a selfless pride. I do work every year now with the Stanford Executive Program, and you were alluding to that, where business people from all over the world come to Stanford. They spend 6 weeks there, and I'm their mindfulness teacher. I do 7 or 8 sessions every summer on mindfulness, positivity, gratitude, compassion, love. And I am capable of aligning myself with who they are, even though we don't have the same values. I don't really care how much money they make. What I want them to be is kinder, more loving people. I've learned, and my intention is enough, where I can create a relationship with them where they open and want some of this. Like they come up to me and thank me for reminding them to hug their kids or be kinder to their wife, or just maybe slow down a little at work so that they can smell the coffee. But again, it's an appreciation of being in a certain space where I can allow whatever the goodness is, I can be a piece of that, and be of use.
Uh, both those stories were lovely. I've got two quotes for you and maybe a third quote. Mother Teresa once said, I think this is in the last 10 years, so while she's not alive, on the other side, compassion is like a deep breath for many. And by that, I mean, I think she meant slowing down just would do a world of wonder. As close as you're going to get is taking a deep breath, because we're busy. We got the iPhone, we got everything, the rat race going on up here. I got two quotes from Thich Nhat Hanh, or Thich Nhat Hanh, Chogyam Trungpa, and they're from 2014. And if I could get your reaction, and then if you could tie it in to wrapping it up, unless there's other stuff you wanted to cover, we have as much time as you'd like. But between these three quotes, another springboard. Taking one breath is like taking one step. Both bring peace and harmony. And I have to do just the stars in the background. It's a cute quote. I like it. And the second one.
Let me give you a response to Mother
Please.
Teresa from who I am. 100% know that's true. Because I know the more compassionate I am, the more in alignment I am, the better I am in this world, the more purposeful I feel. Like it's obvious in every cell of who I am. I read a study which suggested that it's only when we're in compassion that MRI has suggested that that's when we're finally beginning to see things truthfully. That our basic negativity so distorts other people that it's only with compassion that we can finally see them more clearly. I love that. Because who I am, I'm a social scientist. I love that, when I'm in compassion, it's because finally, for a moment, this is what's true.
The Big Mary once said in the last 10 years, ego is blocking love.
That's it.
And I love that because it's real simple. And then another angel said, ego is a false security blanket. We all got one though. We're like Linus, and you got to do the thumb a little. Here's one more. No way I ever came up with this because there's some terms in it. But here it is. The way to experience nowness is to realize that this very moment, this very point in life is always the occasion. Chogyam Trungpa. And that might be a good one for you to just touch upon the here and now. Remember, you mentioned Ram Dass earlier before the show. That's been a really big point from a lot of folks. Do you mind touching on the here and now? And I don't need to read that quote again, do I?
You know, if you want me, let me read you a poem
Please.
that is probably as good a place as any to end. It's a poem by Mary Oliver, and it sums up to me forgiveness and anything that I might have tried to learn in this world, okay? It's Mary Oliver, The Settlement. Look, it's spring, and last year's loose dust has turned into this soft willingness. The windflowers have come up trembling. Slowly the brackens are uplifting their curvaceous and pale bodies. The thrushes have come home, none less than filled with mystery, sorrow, happiness, music, ambition. And I am walking out into all of this with nowhere to go and no task undertaken but to turn the pages of this beautiful world over and over in the world of my mind. Therefore, dark past, I'm about to do it. I'm about to forgive you for everything.
I love this. Fred, you've been amazing for being a guest on the show. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm pretty sure people really felt this. If you could do a comment, an emoji, anything, it would be fantastic. Fred, thank you so much for being a guest on Angels, Positivity, and Love. It was a total delight.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it, and you did bring out a way of answering that almost no interviewers do. So
Oh, and can I blow sage? We talked about it ahead of time. I'm going to
of course.
Texas, and then we wrap it up. So it's a fake false ending. But I will give you a challenge of a mantra for us that you love. Either you picked it up from Ram Dass or someone along the way you invented it, or it's an obvious one that we should all look. Humans forget everything, and I used to think that the one thing that I said was original was remember to remember if you can remember when you remember to remember. But no, a book fell off the shelf at a bookstore one time. It was in the Buddhist section, and it was Songyal Rinpoche, if I said his name correctly. He said in a foreword to one of those many Tibetan Book of Dying books, he said, a page and a half forward, he said at the very end, and for 35 years, I've taught my students, remember to remember. And I was like, oy vey, there's nothing original that I can say. So, but that's the one I'll leave everybody with. And I'm going to blow sage from Texas. Are you already getting it in California?
Thank you.
And do you have one reminder for us on any front? Is it just to breathe, smile, and don't take yourself or anything too seriously?
Well, I've been using for a while now a little bit the mantra that Ram Dass ended his life with. And it was simply, I am loving awareness. After his whole life, that's where he ended. I am loving awareness.
And that's about as good of an ending as we're going to get for a show like this. So Fred Luskin in California, you're the best. Thank you for being on the show. Really.
Thank you, Micah. I appreciate the invite.